Welcome back, everyone, for this week's conversation between Meg and I about the readings for the week. We start off with the Gospel this week, the story of Jesus being asked to heal a young girl and on the way interrupted by a woman who has some ideas about what Jesus might do for her.
It's one of those stories that we think we know well, and every now and again we find something, oh, I hadn't noticed that before. Right. And one of the things I noticed as I read the Gospel this week was that the young girl is just approaching her physical maturity and about to begin her reproductive life. And I'm assuming something here, but that the woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years is probably moving on towards the end of her physically reproductive life. And yet they are both worthy, if that's the right word,
yes,
of Jesus' healing. And he is prepared to interrupt one part of the story for the other woman. So both women are really significant and important in the story. One, the child of an important person in the synagogue, and one, a woman unclean and to all intents and purposes totally on the outside of the community. And they're both of equal importance, and I think that's a lesson for us to learn in there. Yes,
there are a few contrasts between the women, let's say, aren't there? Yeah. You know, their status in the community, even as a child, she's still the child, as you said, of a powerful person.
Yes,
yes, and in this, the woman has approached Jesus. Looking for something, expecting, hoping for something from Jesus, whereas the girl is just lying there and other people have had to go on her behalf, haven't they?
Yes, and there's a desperation for both of them. It's interesting, Annette, that in both situations there's a desperateness of last resort. There's no other hope for either the girl or the woman. And they come, or someone comes on the girl's behalf to Jesus. The father is desperate. The woman is desperate. And it's another commonality, I guess, in the two women, although on the surface they're poles apart.
Yes, that's right. And the woman has, the story tells us, tried all different kinds of things, hasn't she, for her healing. And we don't really know much about the story of the little girl and what's happened to her, do we? Just that,
no.
That she's very sick. So with the little girl, it may have been a very sudden sort of thing that's just happened. With a woman, it's obviously been an ongoing way that she's had to live her life for all of that time.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting, isn't it? All the contrasts and the similarities, and
yes,
and the fact that the woman's story interrupts almost the girl's story, doesn't it? And that's something that Mark does sometimes in Mark's Gospel, isn't it? They talk about this, the sandwiches of stories where something happens and it gets interrupted and then it picks up again later on. But it keeps your interest, doesn't it? It shows that the Gospel writers had an art or a craft to what they were doing, didn't they?
Yes.
So, and it keeps us engaged and interested in the story.
The other similarity too is the 12 years. The woman has been hemorrhaging for 12 years. The young girl is 12 years old, we're told.
Yes.
And the other interesting thing for me is that neither of the females in the story are named.
No. I mean, something that not that I noticed about the story, but that made me think of was, the attempts that this woman has made to fix things and to make things right. And it reminded me of how we can sometimes try so many different ways to fix problems that we might have, or even within the church, when we think, oh, maybe the church is in a precarious situation, what can we do? Let's try this program. Let's experiment with that. And with this woman, all it did was cost her money and exhausted her, and she was not even was she not cured, she was worse off almost, because she'd lost her money as well. And I think, I wonder if we do that sometimes, if we grasp at things, when the answer for the woman was to reach out to Jesus. What if the story is asking us to think about that, that reaching out for Jesus, that maybe not get to the point where you've tried everything and it's failed. How about we try Jesus first? Pray, and just see what happens. In this woman's case, it was a remarkable change in her circumstances, wasn't it?
Yes.
Exactly what she was looking for, exactly what she wanted.
What she needed.
Yes, yeah. And I'm also interested in Jesus, in the difference in how Jesus is in the two encounters as well. One of them, the woman touching him, he doesn't do anything. But he knows that something has happened in a way that we don't really understand. Power has gone out of him, and he has to stop and find out what's happened. Whereas with the little girl, he has to go and say words to her, which we don't actually very often in the scriptures get Jesus' actual words, do we? But we do in this story, the Talitha Kum, which means little girl, get up. Or so that difference too, in Jesus being asked for something and almost without him knowing he's given it, or Jesus making a choice, a decision, an action that comes from him to restore life in a situation as well.
The other thing that just sort of occurred to me as we were talking, Jesus noted that the power went from him. And I thought, is it something akin to being with someone in a heavy pastoral situation and you're travelling along okay, and at the end of the day you are absolutely exhausted?
Yeah.
And it's that I've got nothing left. But Jesus did have more left.
Yes.
But I'm thinking, how could you feel the power go from you? And then it occurred to me, well, maybe it's something like that a great emotion almost has gone into that healing. A great deal of emotion goes into pastoral care very often, and it's that that you're depleted. I think have to think some more about that.
Yes. Now we've tried hard this week, haven't we, to find a way of neatly segueing into the Samuel reading, and we could have spent the whole of our time talking about the gospel reading, because there is so much in there to look at and think about and explore. But we did say a couple of weeks ago that we were going to spend a bit of time looking at the readings from 1st and 2nd Samuel. And here we are again with David in an unusual situation. And look, I have decided that I could bore people senseless if I keep on saying what I think about David, which is you've got to not just read between the lines, you've got to actually read the lines that the lectionary leaves out, because they paint a much deeper picture of who this person was and what was happening at the time. So we have verse 1, and then we skip all the way down to verse 17. What we have left out is David finding out about Saul's death, which, again, we've skipped over that in the lectionary. Saul has been fighting the Philistines and has been at the point of death, and either commits suicide or is about to commit suicide and asks the Amalekite to kill him. Then the Amalekite comes and reports to David what's happened. And you and I were talking about this, whether the the king committing suicide is an honourable act or a dishonourable act, and we don't know, do we?
No. And in 1 Samuel, it actually says that Saul fell on his sword. But in 2 Samuel, in the part that we leave out today, he is leaning on his spear. So,
yes,
as often is the case, there are conflicting stories or slightly different stories.
Yes, and is he leaning on it because he's just, leaning on it tidily, or does that mean he's actually, fallen on it and still leaning but isn't quite dead yet? There's a question about whether the Amalekite is making up this story as he tells it to David to maybe get a reward or something, but what instead happens is that David has him killed because he's been the one to kill Saul. So it didn't end up very well for the Amalekite, we know that. And this is in a time when David has actually been fighting with the Philistines, not in this particular battle because they weren't all that happy about having an Israelite with them fighting against the Israelites, but he's been a bit of almost a mercenary fighting with them, or he's trying to escape from Saul. So it's all part of this ongoing story of battles and wars and bloodshed, isn't it? But then David goes, the lectionary we have, he goes into this great lament for both Saul and Jonathan, Saul's son, who has been David's great friend. And, he's weeping and wailing loudly. When I read this, I do have a sense that it's a bit of a performance. I've got to say, I am very suspicious of David.
He weaves into one song of lament his enemy, Saul, and his best buddy, Jonathan, and puts them all in this one great song of lament.
Yes.
As one of the commentaries I read said, he's very, very clever, rises to the heights of poetry and song, and yet he's a scoundrel.
Yes.
Totally conflicting person.
Which is kind of good in a way because we also are like that, aren't we? And
I guess so.
We might not rise to the heights of David nor sink to the depths.
Yes.
But we are a mixed bag, aren't we? None of us is perfect and none of us is perfectly terrible. And here we have as one of the greatest heroes of the Hebrew scriptures, someone who is very complex and complicated. And the stories about him are complex and complicated. And I feel like we don't give enough honour to that we just have David pretty much on a pedestal and just trip lightly over a lot of the terrible things that he does. It's something that we need to be both wary of because, we have, all through our history, we have people who we have put up on pedestals and we have ignored the terrible things that they've done to the detriment of a lot of people. But the flip side of that is I think we're swinging towards a time when we're expecting people to be almost perfect. And when we find things in people's histories that, when they were younger, they might have done something, rash, or even now they might, we kind of discount them completely as a person. And we need to find a balance in that, don't we? We need to find a balance between lionising someone and making them a saint when they're not, and just accepting that human beings are human beings. Somehow at the moment there's this kind of it's almost a gleeful ganging up on people when they are people, who have some sort of fame or notoriety, and people find out that they've done something wrong and they've got evidence and they put it up there on the internet and everybody piles on, it is a pile on, rather than recognising that we're not perfect. And, it's about finding the balance, I think.
In the lectionary, and it continues, as you said at the beginning, to mystify us by both what's there and what's not there.
Yes.
the parts that are left out.